Mummy, please open the door. We're hungry.
I told you. Your mother is dead. She's never coming back. Pay me by Friday, or everything goes to the EFCC. You want to report me to the EFCC? Morayo, after everything I've done for you, you are the one blackmailing me. You should be thanking me. I'm the only reason your little secret hasn't become front page news. What secret? The one everyone will believe, whether it's true or not.
At that moment, Folashade realized something that would change her life forever. The greatest enemy she would ever face wasn't a stranger. It was the people she had spent years calling family and friends. She had built an empire. She had sacrificed everything for the people she loved. But she was about to discover a painful truth. Sometimes, the people eating at your table are secretly praying for your downfall. And before the story was over, Folashade would do something so unbelievable.
Welcome to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do.
Folashade Adewale never planned to become one of the biggest names in the Lagos real estate. That dream belonged to her husband, Tunji. He was a dreamer. Folashade was simply the woman who believed in him. Together, they bought a piece of land in Lekki with a bank loan, a few loyal workers, and a dream that seemed far bigger than their bank accounts. Every block they laid represented hope. Every building brought them one step closer to the future they imagined for themselves and their two children. Then tragedy struck. Just 2 years after breaking ground on their first development, Tunji was killed in a fatal accident along the Lekki-Ekpe Expressway. In a heartbreaking moment, Folashade lost the love of her life. But she didn't have the luxury of falling apart. She had two young children depending on her, a struggling business that was drowning in debt, and a promise she had made to her husband that she would never let his dream die. So she buried her grief, she swallowed her tears, and she went back to work. Nobody knew that every successful building she completed was built by a woman whose heart was still mourning. Years passed. The small business Tunji left behind grew into one of the most respected real estate companies in Lagos. By the time Folashade turned 40, she owned multiple developments across Lekki and Ikoyi. People called her successful. They called her hardworking. Some even called her lucky. But they never saw the sacrifices behind the success. And unfortunately, neither did the people she loved the most. If there was one thing nobody could ever accuse Folashade of, it was being selfish. She was the kind of woman who would give everything she had to the people she loved without thinking twice. Her elder sister, Bukola, was a living proof of that. Years earlier, Folashade had paid for Bukola's master's degree abroad, believing it would open doors and give her the future she deserved. But life didn't go the way either of them had imagined. Bukola returned to Nigeria pregnant with twins and no clear answer about who their father was. Most people would have walked away, but instead, Folashade stepped in without complaining. From that day on, she became everything that family needed and the only stable figure they could rely on. In many ways, she had been playing the role of both mother and father to those children long before they were born. As the years passed, she quietly paid Bukola's rent. When the twins started school, she paid every term school fee too. To Folashade, they weren't just her sister's children, they were her own. And that was simply who she was. If the people she loved were in trouble, she never looked the other way. She became the solution. Her kindness didn't stop with family. If you were fortunate enough to have Folashade in your life, you would never stay down for long. One afternoon, while she was inspecting one of her construction sites, her phone rang. It was Morayo. She was crying so hard that Folashade could barely understand what she was saying. "Shade, please help me. My landlord has locked up my shop. I am finished. I've lost everything." Without asking a single question, Folashade left the site and drove straight there. By the time she arrived, a small crowd had gathered outside the locked shop. Morayo sat on the pavement with her face buried in her hands. She looked completely defeated. Folashade walked over to the landlord, settled every penny that was owed, collected the keys, and placed them gently in Morayo's trembling hands. Morayo broke down in tears. "I don't know how I would ever repay you." Folashade smiled and hugged her. "You don't owe me anything." That day, Morayo didn't just regain her shop, she regained her hope. Years passed, and life smiled on her again. She expanded her business and started doing well. Then another storm came. This time, it wasn't her landlord, it was the bank. A bad investment left her drowning in debt, and the bank was ready to seize everything she had worked for. Once again, she ran to the one person who had never failed her, Folashade. Without hesitation, Folashade paid off the entire debt. But she didn't stop there. She wanted Morayo to become financially independent. So instead of just giving her money, she gave her an opportunity. She handed Morayo the management of her rental properties. It was a business worth millions of naira. Folashade trusted her with all of it. Most people would have hired a professional property manager, but Folashade chose her friend. She believed loyalty was more valuable than experience. She believed trust was earned, and in her heart, Morayo had earned it. But while Folashade believed she was changing the lives of people she loved, she never stopped to ask herself one painful question. What if her kindness was changing them for the worse? One evening, Bukola stopped by Morayo's house after work. The two women sat outside with drinks, talking about life. At first, it was harmless conversation. Then the topic shifted to Folashade. Bukola sighed deeply. "You know, sometimes I wonder if my own sister even sees me." Morayo frowned. "What do you mean?" Bukola took another sip of her drink. "Everybody praises Shade. They call her successful. They call her generous. But has anyone ever stopped to ask how it feels to always be the one receiving help?" Morayo looked at her for a moment before speaking. "Auntie, what are you trying to say?" Bukola let out a bitter laugh. "I'm my elder sister, Morayo. I changed that girl's diaper. I looked after her when we were younger. But today, I have to wait for my own younger sister to send me money before I can even pay my rent." She shook her head. "It shouldn't have been this way." Morayo didn't argue. Instead, she quietly poured more drink into Bukola's glass. "Maybe you've been looking it the wrong way." Bukola raised an eyebrow. Morayo leaned in. "After everything you both have been through, don't you think you've earned a bigger space in your sister's life?" Bukola said nothing, but from the look on her face, the thought had already taken root. The two women wanted two different things. Bukola wanted what she believed life had denied her. Morayo wanted a lifestyle she could no longer afford. One was driven by entitlement, the other by greed. Neither of them realized it yet, but those two desires were about to destroy the person who had loved them both without conditions. Not long after, Bukola arrived at Folashade's house with the biggest smile she had worn in years. "Shade," she said excitedly, "I have good news." Folashade laughed. "Looking at your face, somebody must have won the lottery." Bukola shook her head. "It is even better." She pulled out her phone and handed it to her. "My daughter got into the University of Toronto." Folashade's eyes lit up. She jumped on her feet and hugged her sister. "Are you serious?" Bukola nodded, tears already gathering in her eyes. I never thought this day would come. Without giving it a second thought, Folashade said, "Don't worry about the tuition. I will take care of everything." Bukola hesitated for a moment. "Actually, I was thinking it would be easier if you sent the money to me. I already have someone helping me process everything in Canada." Folashade didn't question it. Why would she? This was her own sister, a woman she trusted all her life. So she transferred every naira Bukola asked for and never thought about it again. While Folashade was busy helping her family, another problem was quietly growing inside her business. It started with something so small she almost ignored. One tenant claimed he had paid his rent, but the payments never appeared in the company's record. Murayo apologized immediately. It must be a banking delay. Folashade accepted the explanation. Few weeks later, another payment went missing, then another. Every time she asked about it, Murayo had an answer. The tenant is lying. The accountant made a mistake. The bank reversed the payment. Each explanation sounded reasonable. And because Folashade trusted her, she believed every single word. Until one afternoon, she sat alone in her office, comparing the records herself. The numbers simply didn't make any sense. For the first time in years, she found herself asking a question she never imagined she would ask. Was someone stealing from her? She picked up her phone. "Murayo, can you come to my office, please? We need to talk." Murayo's heart skipped. For the first time, she realized Folashade was beginning to see the truth. Murayo barely slept that night. She kept replaying the meeting in her head, the look on Folashade's face. The financial statements spread across the table, the questions she couldn't answer. For the first time since she started stealing from the company, she realized she was running out of lies. If Folashade dug any deeper, everything would come crashing down. She would lose her job, her business, her reputation, maybe even her freedom. Panic took over. Instead of admitting what she had done, she started looking for a way to save herself. A few days later, an old acquaintance who worked at the land registry gave her an idea. It was illegal, it was dangerous, but to Murayo, it felt like her only way out. Together, they created documents that made it appear as though millions of naira had been moved through Folashade's real estate company. On paper, it looked convincing. In reality, every single document was fake. Murayo stared at the file in front of her. Her hands were shaking. She knew crossing this line would change everything, but she crossed it anyway. The following afternoon, she walked into Folashade's office. This time, she wasn't there to explain the missing money. She was there to rewrite the entire story. She placed the file on the desk. "Shade, I think we are both in trouble." Folashade frowned. "What are you talking about?" Murayo slowly pushed the document towards her. "I found this. They think you've been laundering money through your own properties." Folashade stared at the papers. Her heart began to race. Murayo reached across the table and gently held Folashade's hand. "Shade, listen to me. If these documents get out before we can stop them, everything you've spent years building will be destroyed. Your company, your reputation, every single thing." Folashade stared at the document lying on her desk. Her hands were trembling. "This isn't true," she whispered. "I know," Murayo replied softly, "but the people asking questions don't know that." She squeezed Folashade's hand. "Leave everything to me. I know the people involved. I will make sure this never gets to the EFCC. There are just certain people that needs to be settled." For the first time in her life, Folashade felt completely helpless. She nodded. "Do whatever you have to do." That was all Murayo needed to hear. From that day on, the calls never stopped. Sometimes they came in the middle of the night, sometimes during business meetings, Sometimes while Folashade was having dinner with her children, every call carried the same message. Shade, they are asking questions again. I had to pay someone. I need more money. Every single time. Folashade transferred the money without hesitation. Not because she believed she had committed any crime, but because she believed she was protecting everything she had spent 15 years of her life building. Weeks turned into months. The payments became bigger and more frequent. Slowly, the cracks began to show. She postponed projects that should have started immediately. She delayed payments to contractors. She even walked away from a prime piece of land in Lekki, a property she would normally afford to acquire. People around her assumed she had become more cautious. Only Folashade knew the truth. She was running out of money and she was running out of strength. The stress followed her everywhere. She stopped laughing the way she used to. She barely answered personal calls anymore. Most mornings, she left home before her children woke up. Most nights, she returned after they had gone to bed. Sometimes, the nanny would quietly say, "They waited for you, ma. They wanted to have dinner with you." Folashade would force a smile. "I will eat with them tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. She was so busy trying to protect their future that she didn't realize she was slowly disappearing from their presence. Then one Tuesday morning, her body finally gave up. She was inspecting a new construction site in Lekki when she suddenly stopped talking. The workers noticed her swaying. "Madam, are you okay?" She tried to answer. No words came out. The next thing they heard was the sound of her body hitting the ground. When Folashade opened her eyes, she was lying in a hospital bed. The doctor sat quietly beside her. He removed his glasses and looked at her. "Mrs. Adewale, we've reviewed all your test results. There is no easy way to say this." Folashade swallowed hard. "Just tell me the truth." The doctor nodded. "Your heart is severely damaged. There is a surgery that could save your life, but it isn't available in Nigeria." He paused, then he quietly added, "If you don't have the surgery soon, you may have 6 months. 6 months. The words echoed in her mind. For 15 years, she had lived for everyone except herself. She had built homes for strangers, paid school fees for children that weren't hers, saved businesses that weren't her responsibility, carried burdens nobody asked her to carry. Yet, lying on that hospital bed, she found herself asking one heartbreaking question: "If I die today, who is going to look after my children?" A few days after she was discharged, Folashade called a small family meeting. She told them she wanted to start putting her affairs in order, just in case. She expected tears, she expected prayers, she expected hope. Instead, she noticed something she couldn't explain. The concern felt awkward. The questions came too quickly. What happens to the Ikoyi house? Who will manage the company? Have you written your will? Even Bukola had stopped calling it your house. Now it had suddenly become the family house. One evening, Folashade overheard Bukola's daughter speaking in the kitchen. "Mom, I don't think Auntie would like everyone talking about her property while she is still alive." For a brief second, Bukola fell silent. Then she replied coldly, "So, we should wait for her to die before we think of the future, abi? You will understand when you are older." Folashade stood quietly outside the kitchen door. She didn't say a word, but something inside her began to break. The day that followed were the longest of Folashade's life. She barely slept. Most of the time, she simply lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking, wondering, questioning every decision she had made over the last 15 years. One afternoon, unable to sleep, she picked up her phone and began to scroll absent-mindedly through social media. Then, she stopped. A video on her niece page caught her attention. It was one of the twins laughing and spinning the camera around to show off a beautiful newly completed duplex in Lekki. Mommy is now a lucky home owner, the child bragged excitedly. See our new house. The camera panned across the compound, capturing the gleaming building behind them. Everyone in the background was smiling. Her heart skipped. She immediately called Bukola. There was no answer. She called again. Still nothing. Something didn't feel right. The next morning, Folashade asked a lawyer to quietly make a few inquiries. A few days later, the truth arrived in a brown envelope. There had never been any tuition payment to the University of Toronto. In fact, there had never been an admission. Everything had been a lie. For over a year, the money Folashade believed was paying for her niece's education had been used to build the very house she had seen online, brick by brick, room by room. Why she drove the same car for 6 years? Because she always believed her family needs come first. She sat there in silence, the envelope resting on her lap. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Some betrayals are too deep for tears. They simply leave you numb. During these difficult weeks, Folashade discovered something money could never buy: presence. If wealth was measured by the people who truly showed up when life fell apart, she suddenly realized she wasn't as rich as everyone believed. Grace, the children's nanny, came every single day. She adjusted Folashade's pillows, made sure she ate, prayed with her before leaving each evening. Nobody asked her to, she simply cared. Chef Tayo came almost every afternoon with fresh soup. He never stayed long. He would quietly place the flags on the bedside table, ask how she was feeling, and leave. He never asked for money. He never asked about the company. He never asked about the properties. He simply showed up. Bukola came too, but somehow every visit ended the same way. So, have you thought about writing your will? What happens to the Ikoyi house? Who will oversee the company if anything happens? Folashade answered politely, but each question felt heavier than the last. As for Morayo, she never came at all. The woman who had once called herself Folashade's sister suddenly had every excuse in the world to stay away. That silence told Folashade everything she needed to know. It was in those lonely days inside that hospital room that she made the biggest decision of her life. One evening, she asked the nurse to call her lawyer. When Barrister Kunle arrived, she waited until they were completely gone. Then she quietly said, "I need you to help me disappear." The lawyer stared at her. For a long moment, he didn't say a word. He honestly wasn't sure if she had lost hope or lost her mind. A few weeks later, Lagos woke up with a heartbreaking news. Businesswoman and real estate developer Folashade Adewale had died after suffering complications during what was supposed to be a routine medical procedure. The news spread quickly. Friends, business partners, clients, everyone was shocked. At the funeral, Bukola cried louder than anyone else. She clung to the casket, collapsed into the arms of sympathizer, and kept repeating the same words. My sister didn't deserve this. People pitied her. No one knew the tears hiding behind her sunglasses weren't true. 3 weeks after the funeral, Bukola packed her bags and moved into Folashade's Ikoyi mansion. At first, she told everyone it was only temporary. The children shouldn't be alone. They need family. People believed her, but the truth slowly revealed itself. Within a month, both luxury cars Folashade had bought for her children had been sold. The jewelry she had carefully kept for Yomide's 18th birthday disappeared. Designer handbags, shoes, clothes, anything valuable slowly found a new owner. When people asked why she was wearing her late sister's expensive outfit, Bukola simply laughed. I'm only keeping Shade's memory alive. The people listening smiled. Only Bukola knew what she really meant. Then she made a decision that changed the atmosphere of the house completely. She fired Grace, the children's nanny, the woman who had loved those children almost as much as their own mother. Grace stood there in tears. Madam, I don't need salary. Please, let me stay. The children have already lost their mother. They shouldn't lose everyone else too. Bukola didn't even look at her. Are you mad? I have made my decision. Collect your salary from the account office. There will be no need for your service anymore. Grace looked towards the children. Ayomide was already crying. David held tightly onto her hands. Neither of them understood why another person they loved was leaving. Grace knelt in front of them and hugged them both. I will come and see you. Even she knew it was probably a promise she wouldn't be allowed to keep. From that day, the house no longer felt like home. It felt like a place where two children were simply waiting for someone to love them again. Without Grace, without their mother, everything changed. Dinner became the hardest part of the day. Bukola's daughter sat at the dining table eating freshly prepared meal. Ayomide and David sat quietly at the other end with instant noodles or cereals. One evening, David looked at the table in confusion. Auntie, can I have chicken too? Bukola didn't even raise her head. Eat what is in front of you. Before David could speak again, one of Bukola's daughters laughed. You know this isn't your house anymore, right? Our mom owns everything now. The room fell silent. The other twin looked down at her plate. She didn't laugh. She looked uncomfortable. Then she quietly whispered, you should probably get used to it. Ayomide reached under the table and held her little brother's hand. Neither of them said another word. For the first time since losing their mother, they understood something even more painful. They were no longer wanted in their own home. Bukola didn't stop there. A few days later, she announced that the children would no longer be using the family driver. It cost so much, she said. From then on, every morning, Ayomide and David were put inside a keke and sent off to school. Meanwhile, Bukola's daughters were driven comfortably in an air-conditioned SUV. She saw nothing wrong with it, but someone else did, Femi. The very next morning, he arrived at the gates before 7 o'clock. He watched as the keke pulled up. Without saying a word, he walked over to the children. Go and bring your bags. They looked at him in surprise. Uncle, he smiled. You're riding with me from today. From that morning on, it became a routine. Every weekday, Femi picked them up before work, drove them to school, and then headed straight to his electronic shop. He never complained. He never asked Bukola for permission. He simply did what he believed was right. A few weeks later, the school called. Ayomide and David had been sent out of class because their school fee had not been paid. Bukola knew but chose to ignore. When Femi heard what happened, he quietly went to the school that same afternoon. He paid every outstanding balance from the savings he had spent years putting aside to expand his small business. He told the principal only one thing: please, don't embarrass my children again. If there is ever a problem, call me. He never told the children what he had sacrificed, and he never asked anyone to thank him. One night after dinner, David sat beside him in the small sitting room. The little boy was unusually quiet. Then he looked up. Uncle, Femi smiled. Yes? David hesitated. If mommy comes back from heaven, we should know where we live now. Femi felt his throat tightened. For a moment, he could not speak. He simply pulled the little boy into his arm and held him tightly. Months passed. The children spoke less. They smiled less. Even the once lively mansion in Ikoyi had grown strangely quiet. Only one thing seemed to grow louder with each passing day: Bukola's sense of ownership. Then, the day everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The formal reading of Folashade Adewale's will. Bukola arrived early. So did Morayo. Neither of them said much, but the excitement on their faces was impossible to hide. Barrister Kune Bakari walked into the conference room carrying a single brown file. He adjusted his glasses and looked around the room. Ladies and gentlemen, before I begin reading the last will and testament of the late Mrs. Folashade Adewale, he paused. There is someone who has asked to address you personally. The room fell silent. Confused looks filled the table. Then the conference room doors slowly opened. High heels echoed against the tiled floor. Everyone turned. Bukola's face drained of color. Morayo stopped breathing. Standing in the doorway, alive, was Folashade Adewale. Nobody moved. Nobody dared spoke. For a few long seconds, the room was completely silent. Bukola blinked several times, as if her eyes were playing tricks on her. Morayo slowly pushed her chair back. No, that's impossible. Folashade walked into the room with calm, steady steps. She looked healthier, stronger, more at peace than anyone there had seen her in months. She stopped at the head of the table, beside Barrister Kunle. Then she looked around the room. I can see all of you have questions. A faint smile crossed her face. So let me answer the biggest one. No, I never died. A gap swept across the room. I asked Barrister Kunle to help me disappear. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed the truth. She looked directly at Bukola. I needed to know whether the people I loved would protect my children or my property. Bukola lowered her head. Then Folashade turned to Morayo. And I needed to know whether my close friend would finally tell the truth or bury herself beneath more lies. Nobody could look in her eyes. Barrister Kunle quietly opened another file. This contains evidence of every illegal transfer made from Mrs. Adewale's account. He placed another file on the table, and this contains evidence showing the documents used to blackmail her were forged. Morayo's face turned pale. There are also signed statements from everyone involved. The room became unbearable silence. For the first time since the nightmare began, Folashade was no longer afraid. She was finally free. Morayo eventually admitted everything. Every stolen payment, every forged document, every lie. Faced with overwhelming evidence and certainty of criminal prosecution, she agreed to return every naira she could. The rest was recovered through the sale of her remaining assets. Then Folashade looked at her sister. I've spent my whole life giving you. I buried my own dreams to help you build yours. I loved your children like they were my own. Her voice never rose. It didn't have to. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your sister. You started seeing me as an opportunity. You built a whole house behind me with my own money. Bukola broke down. Shade, please. I am sorry. Folashade closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there were tears. But there were no anger. You have two choices. You return everything that can still be recovered, and you walk away from my life forever. Or we settle this in court. Bukola knew she had already lost. A few months later, the unfinished duplex in Lekki was sold. The proceeds covered part of what she owed. For the first time in months, Folashade had enough money to do what she should have done from the beginning. She flew abroad for the heart surgery that would save her life. This time, as she was wheeled into the operating theater, she wasn't wondering who would come to visit. She already knew. Months later, after making a full recovery, Folashade visited the one place she had avoided for years, Tunji's grave. She sat quietly beside him. The wind rustled the trees. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she smiled through her tears. You were right. I spent years believing love meant giving people everything they asked for. I finally understand. It was never about how much I could give. She stood up, brushed the dust from her dress, and walked away. Not with a bigger family, but with a better one. She chose peace and the people who had loved her, long before they knew what she owned. And for the first time in many years, Folashade Adewale finally chose herself. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in Folashade's shoes, would you have forgiven Bukola, or would you have taken her to court and let the Lord decide? Tell me what you would have done in the comment section.
And if you enjoy powerful Nigerian stories like this one, subscribe to Niger Life Stories. We have many more unforgettable stories waiting for you.